Hello and welcome to the table, Baldurs Gate, D&D, and yes, Warhammer friends from both the 40k and fantasy communities. Have a seat, grab your favorite drinks, and settle in for our unique modded character build and subclass of the Paladin. This is also going to be a very thematic, elemental type of build focusing on the use of flame-based abilities, of course for offensive use, but surprisingly, as we'll see, for defensive and protective purposes as well. This episode will be going through all 12 levels of Oath of the Phoenix Paladin subclass. Credits to the mod author, Blue Joe 1, for putting the time and effort to make this class stand out amongst the base game subclasses of the Paladin. Side note, Blue Joe 1 is quickly becoming one of my favorite mod authors from the Baldurs Gate 3 mod nexus, which is where I got this mod from. Something to note is that this is a lore-friendly class, as it does exist within the tabletop realm of the official 5th edition D&D setting, especially because the features and tenets of this class really fit seamlessly well into the world. Now, for all of the new viewers to the channel, one of my main focuses for videos is creating unique Baldurs Gate 3 characters using mods for enhancement and roleplay, specifically giving you different ways of replayability. Now, if that's something you are super into, I would love to hear your personal favorite character builds in the comments below, and let's get an in-depth discussion going on characters you would specifically build this class around, what you would specifically multi-class this with in terms of vanilla-based classes, or in my case too, with other modded classes to really create insane and wild synergies. Now, I also would love to hear some build requests from all of you, whether it's on this class or on other classes, such as my previous video from Blue Joe 1's other subclass mod of Oath of the Storm. Side note, I also do have videos of narrative-driven Total War Warhammer campaigns of both modded and non-modded factions to tell unique stories of each individual faction leader. Now, if you love talking shop about character builds or epic story-driven war campaigns, consider hitting the like, subscribe, and bell icon notifications so we can go on more adventures like that together. Now, also for new viewers who may have stumbled upon this video, we will structure this character build starting off with level 1 specific choices with the race and other beginning features. Afterwards, going through levels 2 through 12 solely as this class, and yes, I will explain why we're only going to be using this class for this video, and then saving separate videos for multi-classing, and also wrapping up with specific gear and equipment to complement the build in terms of roleplay or improving stats or spells. Now, to get into the lore of what the class is all about, we'll quote what the mod author has to say for the tenets of Oath of the Phoenix. Oath of the Phoenix Paladins abide by the following tenets. Embrace the flame. I swear to yield the unyielding power of fire, letting it be both my weapon and my shield. I will not fear its destructive force, but instead channel it to bring justice to the world. Destruction for redemption. I understand that sometimes destruction is a path to renewal. I will not shy away from purging corruption with cleansing fire, seeking to bring about a rebirth of justice in the wake of chaos. Courage in the inferno. I shall charge into the heart of danger without hesitation, for fear is but a fleeting shadow in the face of my unwavering resolve. The hotter the flames, the fiercer my determination. Rebirth through sacrifice. I acknowledge that true strength lies in self-sacrifice. I am prepared to lay down my life for the greater good, trusting in the flame to purify and grant me the chance to rise again, stronger than before. Now, based off the description of the tenets and also the features in the later levels that we'll go more in depth on, Blue Joe 1 has really gone all out in making the subclass as distinct as possible from the vanilla counterparts of a typical Holy Paladin. Most paladins have a traditional holy aura about them, and this class is a really good effort as both a reflavor and mechanical changes to things more that are more in line with fire-based elements. Now, I will say that most of the tenets spoken about are definitely in line with a morally quote-unquote good character. However, for this character build, we'll be basing our customization off of one of my favorite Total War Warhammer characters, a champion of chaos, Valkia the Bloody, aka the Shield Maiden of Khorne, the Chaos God of War and martial prowess. Now, quick backstory on Valkia is in the Warhammer fantasy universe, she was one of the Norskin tribe leaders who was known to be a great conqueror before ascending as Khorne's champion after winning many important key battles and defeating a champion from his rival Chaos God, Slaanesh. Now, fun fact, the greater demon whom she defeated, now she uses his head as her shield that she carries with her into battle. Well, we'll definitely do our best to try to get as close as possible with her character build. Can't necessarily say that there's a demon head for a shield though, but this is a character build that really favors an aggressive playstyle, and which we will most certainly try to get, like I said, as close as possible. Warhammer aficionados, please do feel free to correct me in the comments if I may have left out anything important in terms of her lore and backstory, or also when it comes to specific gear, equipment, and leveling choices too. I will admit that I am a huge sucker for lore, and I try to stick as close as possible to the lore and what the characters are supposed to represent, if that makes sense. Now, when it comes to character builds, I do mainly stick with choices in abilities, spells, and equipment that suit characters thematically, or keeping in line with the modded class and trying to have a specific theme that leans into them. However, sometimes I may slip into choosing quote-unquote choices that are metagamey or min-maxes in damage output, or just overall are strategic. I am aware in the D&D and Baldurs Gate communities, there are players that are really all about the number crunching and min-max leveling, but at the end of the day, just as long as you yourself, the player, are having fun with the builds, whether you do love the number crunching or if you just really want to roleplay and not worry too much about the stat allocations, that's what matters in the end. Now, the reason I'm going through all 12 levels only as this class is to truly showcase everything that there is to offer with the features and abilities, and also this is a personal way to say thank you to Blue Joe. As an added thank you as well, I will of course leave the link to the mod in the pinned comment below, along with a few other complimentary mods that pair well with it. Also, speaking of multi-classing, like I mentioned earlier, we will save separate videos for multi-classing modded classes together, or with base game classes to really create different types of synergies. I'm already thinking about some insane wild combinations that this subclass could pair well with. Now, without further ado, let's get into the first level of the build. At your starting level, to really get into the character, the race that we'll be choosing is Tiefling, and not just any vanilla base game Tiefling. I am using a mod that adds various sub-races to Tieflings. It's called Tiefling Compendium, and there's a whole variety of different Tieflings that you can base your character off of, from actual archdevils of the Nine Hells, and not just devils themselves, but also it could be a combination of things like elves and devils mating together, or also in certain cases too, hags and elves. But specifically for us having like freedom of choice, I will be using a variant Tiefling, and the cantrip, some of the features are choosing your own cantrips and spells, which come in the form of these claw attacks for thematic and roleplay purposes. Now yes, I know Valkia herself doesn't use magic in battle, and also Khorne himself isn't the biggest fan of using any magic whatsoever for his warriors, but we can justify it as saying that these are more so abilities or powers that Khorne grants, and fire tends to be very much in line with the Lord of War himself. For the spell choice here, I like having Thorn Whip as my cantrip, dealing 1 to 6 piercing damage and pulling enemies closer to us to eventually stab with our sword or spear. As for the spells, well, these are not necessarily spells, but claw attacks. We'll be choosing the Smoldering Claws, dealing 3 to 6 fire damage. As for the specific actions and features available to us at first level for Oath of the Phoenix, the action of Flame, Bless Me, call upon the Holy Flame to engulf your spirit in the coming battle, taking 1d4 fire damage, but you deal bonus fire damage equal to 1d6 plus your charisma modifier on all weapon attacks. You gain a fire-based breath weapon and generate 3 heat. The duration of the skill increases with your paladin level. Now, heat is going to be one of the elements that we will be basing our equipment and also leveling choices around. With heat, we have 1 to 4 fire damage, but this is kind of like a risk and reward thing too. We essentially have to decide whether we take some fire damage to ourselves in order to gain heat convergence, consume your heat to fuel a powerful attack. The next time you deal fire damage, you deal an additional 1 fire damage for every turn of heat remaining. So it's kind of like saying like, hey, we'll damage ourselves but also dish back some pretty bad hurt on the enemy too. But also subclass features that complement or also counteract some of the negatives too is Infernal Rejuvenation. Your oath binds you to the spirit of the divine flame. You gain fire resistance and you are healed for 1 to 4 hit points when you take fire damage. Healing increases with your charisma modifier, and yes, we'll definitely be focusing on charisma modifiers when it comes to equipment, or also when it comes to dumping our abilities too. Just for roleplay reasons, the deity that you'll choose is Zariel. Zariel's backstory really plays in line with Valkia's backstory too. I think both would definitely get along well over a cup of coffee or 2 large mugs of beer. D&D aficionados, correct me if I'm wrong or miss out any important lore parts, but Zariel was once an angel herself and a very noble being before she became corrupted by Asmodeus, and also in her never-ending war against the demons of chaos too. For background and roleplay purposes, Valkia was technically a soldier, at least a warrior within her tribe before she became chieftain of it, and later down her career path became a champion of chaos. She had very humble origins of being a front lines woman, and she worked her way up really of becoming that one-woman doomstack. You'll be gaining skills of athletics and intimidation. As for your 2 additional skills, I do like putting points into insight, knowing how to read people and situations and detect lies. Definitely something Valkia would be very scrutinizing with, and also we can argue that Valkia was a very persuasive Norskin tribeswoman too, in terms of having political gain and also garnering support from other Norskin tribes. I think she basically had that thing going with her when she married, well, for political and army benefits too. However, when it comes to nitty-gritty ability points, I personally like dumping all the points into charisma because our casting and especially our fire-based spells and abilities will rely on charisma a lot. So that's why we're going to put it up to the maximum level of 17. Second highest would be strength, because we do want to keep in line with Valkia's character of being more so of martial prowess rather than utilizing any spells, or let alone even range weapons too. So strength is going to be our second highest at a respectable 15. Yes, I know they're both charisma and strength are at odd numbers, and ideally we want to have even numbers, so then we get whole bonus points when we're actually rolling dice or in combat too. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves here. Dexterity, not really taking a hit, but also not being much to gain either. We will be relying on heavy armor, and yes, as we'll see later, flying for mobility too. So dexterity we'll leave at a base 10. Wisdom will also leave at base 10 in order to make sure that we have a chance at least on will saves. Intelligence is the ability we're not really going to be using much of, and hey, I mean, you can justify it as saying that Valkia herself didn't have an insanely high intelligence, but she was cunning as a warrior and chieftain too. As for the few remaining points, put some into Constitution so you can get at least a +2 amount extra health at the beginning of the game, and also gaining +2 extra points of health every level. At level 2, the fighting style that I would personally pick is great weapon fighting, and yes, I know in the lore Valkia does use a shield along with a spear, but we're gonna double down on the damage output and also weapon reach with this build, so it only makes sense it complements with great weapon fighting. When you roll a 1 or a 2 on a damage die for an attack with a two-handed melee weapon, that die is re-rolled once. So it's kind of like a little insurance of actually getting as much damage output as possible. Khorne really favors blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne, and really likes his weapon damage output as much as possible. For the spells, these are going to, of course, favor damage output and also an aggressive playstyle too. With Searing Smite, deal an extra 1d6 fire damage, setting our spear on fire, and it will take 1d6 fire damage every turn. Wrathful Smite, to possibly frighten your target, have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls, and they can't move, keeping them in place for you to deal additional damage. Thunderous Smite, I know it doesn't really fit the fire theme, but at the same time, I am mainly picking it for the possibility of knocking our opponents down. Compel Duel, to force enemies to fight only us, and also take attention and damage away from the rest of our party. And also Heroism as a nice little roleplay touch to make ourselves immune to frighten, and also gaining 5 temporary hit points in battle. At level 3, this is where the unique subclass features and actions come into play. With Flame, Hear Thy Penance, we gain 2d6 fire damage or 2d6 +3 radiant damage. Become a holy force of destruction, descend upon your foe, and deal your weapons damage as well as fire and radiant damage to enemies in the area based on a 1d6 and also your charisma modifier plus half your paladin levels. So that's massive damage output with this action right here. And you generate 5 heat. And also, as a reminder, heat basically is kind of like a self-damaging action and condition, engulfed by eventual fire. Take 1 to 4 fire damage each turn, but can use heat convergence. So it's a little bit of a risk reward thing where on your next weapon attack, you deal an additional 1 fire damage for every turn of heat remaining. 5 turns, that can be pretty long too, but also we'll have some equipment and other abilities to help negate and also to offset the negative stuff that heat gives. With Flame, renew thine soul, release a wave of energy from your very soul, heal allies for 2d6 plus your charisma modifier, deal 2d6 charisma modifier on fire and radiant damage. As you rise from the ashes, you are reduced to 1 HP, generating 2 heat. So yes, this is also kind of a little risk reward spell, but also it allows us to kind of offset any damage from heat converged onto us. And also for some unique spells, we gain Burning Hands, which is a melee evocation spell. Each flammable target is hit with 3 to 18 fire damage, and also Hellish Rebuke, very in theme with Valkia herself and also with tieflings in general. React to your next attacker with flames that deal 2 to 20 fire damage. For the variant tiefling race ability, we gain Devil's Tongue, Dissonant Whispers, frighten a creature, giving them disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls, and they cannot move, very similar to Wrathful Smite. And also for the spell here, pick whichever one you want. I decided to go with Divine Favor and decided to roleplay it as Khorne, giving us extra damage from his Blood for the Blood God. At level 4, like I said before, pick whichever spell you want here. I decided to go with Cure Wounds, and while Khorne himself isn't really much of someone that would heal their allies or their followers in battle, you can justify it as saying that Valkia, this version of Valkia, cares more about her party members and essentially can give a helping hand when she needs it. Also for the feat improvement, I personally would pick Ability Improvement and spending our 2 points on Strength and Charisma, each putting 1 into both, and that rounds Strength out to a respectable +4 and Charisma to a respectable +5 evenly. Level 5 is where we gain an extra attack feature and also some unique spells to add to our repertoire of Conjure Flame Blade. Conjure a Flaming Scimitar in your hand that deals 3 to 18 fire damage and sheds Bright Light in a 3-meter radius and Dim Light in 6-meter radius. Now, this is very useful too if you want to use it in close quarters, but also, as we'll get to the equipment, we'll most likely be using our Spear/Pike. Heat Metal is also a very useful spell at this level, dealing 2 to 16 fire damage, causing a metal weapon or armor to glow red hot and force the wearer to let go or receive disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks. The race-specific feature we get here is Instill Fear with our Tiefling race. Project an image of the hell so frightening it makes your target drop everything and become fearful. Very in line with kind of like a Khorne Tiefling, and also if I was shown images of Khorne or the Blood Throne or Brass Throne, that would be pretty frightening in my opinion too. They will be easier to hit and cannot move for 2 turns. For the prepared spells here, I decided to trade a few out with Prayer of Healing for some AoE healing effects for the entire party, Branding Smite to deal 2 to 6 radiant damage, and yes, like I said, I know it's not really in line with Khorne, but at the same time, you can justify it as saying that this is the Blood God's favor, and also Magic Weapon. Infuse a weapon with Arcane Energy. Weapon becomes magical, receiving +1 bonus to attack and damage rolls. Not a lot of features to talk about at level 6 other than Aura of Protection, and also choice of spells here. I decided to go with Protection from Poison as Khorne absolutely hates backstabby enemies and also underhanded tricks like poison, and also Lesser Restoration, curing allies from disease, poison, paralysis, or blindness. Level 7 is another subclass unique feature with Aura of the Eternal Flame. Emit an aura of flame and heat. While this aura is active, you and your allies receive advantage on death saving throws. Allies receive temporary hit points equal to 3 plus your charisma modifier plus your paladin level. A foe is standing within the aura will take at the end of its turn damage, and on a successful save it will take half fire damage. So it's a very useful aura, not just in terms of supporting your entire party, but also in terms of dealing damage and also disadvantage to your enemies too. And also, like I always say, pick whichever spell you want at this level in terms of your playstyle or to fit your roleplay of Valkia better. At level 8, keeping in line with the roleplay as well as doubling down on fire abilities and damage output, the feat I'll be picking here is Flames of Phlegethos, which is a feat added by Feats Expanded or also the additional feats mod, with the prerequisite being Tiefling. This really also ties well into whether you want to double down with your Tiefling roleplay or, yes, of course, for the Warhammer friends, Valkia. You learn to call on Hellfire to serve your commands, gain the following benefits: increase intelligence or charisma score by 1 to a max of 20. When you roll fire damage for a spell you cast, you can reroll any one of them on the fire damage dice, but you must use the new rule even if it is another one. Whenever you cast a spell that deals fire damage, cause flames to wreath around you until the end of your next turn. Flames don't harm you or your possessions, and they shed bright light out to 30 feet and dim light for an additional 30 feet. This is really going to be useful in dimly lit dungeons too, and when the flames are present, any creature within 5 feet of you that hits you with a melee attack takes 1d4 fire damage. And yes, this will stack with some of the abilities that the mod author presented as well, and really it's just complementary too, plus also getting a charisma score closer to 20 and eventually gaining us a +5. That's always a nice little plus too. At level 9, the subclass specific spells we gain are Fireball, 8 to 48 fire damage, shoot a bright flame from your fingers that explodes upon contact, scorching everything in the vicinity, and also Flight, bestowing a flight for ourselves, but also at the same time we gain flight from our demonic wings that we get from another mod too. For the spells here, pick whichever ones that you want. I decided to go with Warden of Vitality for some healing and also support, and also Blinding Smite, not just causing radiant damage but also potentially blinding targets, and also Crusader's Mantle, another team-based support spell that grants radiant damage to allies. At level 10, we have the basic paladin stuff of Aura of Courage. You and nearby allies can't be frightened. And also, go ahead and pick whichever spell you want here for that extra slot. I decided to go with Create Food and Water for out of combat support. Level 11 is more base game paladin stuff, as well as your personal choice in spells. But at level 12, this is where we decide to actually get a new and interesting feat for ourselves. At this level, you could really go either way with all the different feats here. I also like using Gift of the Gem Dragon potentially, increasing charisma by 1, giving us a respectable and overall solid +5 to charisma checks and also for spells and damage output. When you take damage from a creature within 3 meters of you, you use your reaction to deal force damage, attempting to push the creature away. You could also lean into the more martial adept and also very much brutal attacker with Savage Attacker, making melee attacks, roll your damage dice twice and use the highest result. You could also go with an overall ability improvement modifier, or also Elemental Adept, where your spells ignore resistance to a damage type of your choice, with in this case being fire. But also, for this showcase and unique build, I'm gonna go with Charisma, giving us a solid 20, and just truly leaning into the fire-based damage spells, and also dealing some force damage along the way too. Alright everyone, when it comes to the specific gear and equipment, like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I do want it to be thematic, in line with Valkia's character, and also leaning a little bit into fire-based damage spells too. With the Helldusk helmet, we gain Infernal Sight. You can see in magical and ordinary darkness up to a range of 12 meters and cannot be blinded. Very useful status effect for us, and also magical durability. Wielder has a +2 bonus to saving throws against spells, so this also plays in line with Khorne's absolute hate for magic attacks. That's also one of the reasons why he doesn't like Tzeentch, one of my other favorite chaos gods. I won't go into too much detail about that now. And also, attackers can't land critical hits on the wearer, so this gives us a small amount of tanking potential. Plus also we gain the Immolating Gaze spell with 2d16 fire damage, sear and frighten a target with nothing but you glowering at them. Very much in tune with Valkia's attitude and absolute hatred of the world. Speaking of more fire-based spells and abilities, we'll be using the Emblazoned Plate of the Marshal. Magic Plate, all incoming damage is reduced by 2, giving us more of that potential to be that frontline damage dealer and also tank of the party. Endurance by fire, resistance to fire damage, and a +2 to saving throws. The resistance is really going to play in well with the fact that some of the features of this class generate heat and thus more fire damage to ourselves. And also with Fire Shield, wreath your body in flames that shed light in a 3-meter radius, provide resistance to fire and cold damage, and retaliate against all melee attacks for a whopping 10 turns. That's a pretty long time in combat, at least in my personal opinion. Also, to complement our weapon damage output, we'll be using Hellgloom Gloves. Lesser Infernal Touch, weapon attacks deal an additional 1 to 4 fire damage. Unarmed attacks also deal necrotic damage, but we're mostly going to focus on the fact that this will stack with our weapon damage. We also gain a strength saving throw of +1. Also, for the boots, this is personally one of my favorite pieces of equipment. With Helldusk Boots, Steadfast, you cannot be forcibly moved by a foe's spells or actions and ignore effects of difficult terrain, pretty much making us a near unstoppable force on the battlefield. With Infernal Evasion, when you fail a saving throw, you may use your reaction to succeed instead. We also gain the Hellcrawler class action, teleporting to an area and deal 2 to 16 fire damage. That is definitely a way to make an entrance. The Impact Blast spreads in a 3-meter zone. As for our jewelry, I like using Amulet of Baal. On first hit, inflict bleeding damage upon targets that have maximum hit points. Plus also the fact too, this will pair incredibly well with Impaler. With Break the Unbroken, deal an additional 1 to 10 piercing damage to targets that still have all of their hit points. So enemies, boss enemies, this is essentially like a wombo combo killer to them. Also with Death Drinker, when you reduce the target to 0 hit points, you gain 2 to 20 hit points, temporary hit points. So that's also a good way of saying like, hey, first do damage on some of the tougher enemies, and then when killing the weaker mobs, you gain some temporary hit points to help you tank more hits from the boss enemy too. So these play really well hand in hand together. Ring of Regeneration is also good for offsetting some damage done to ourselves by the heat convergence from the previous abilities mentioned, and also with Ring of Elemental Infusion, when you deal acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder using a spell or cantrip, that element infuses your weapons. And yes, it does sound redundant when it comes to the Hellgloom Gloves and also some of the other abilities and features that I mentioned previously. But also, it's a good way of stacking up elemental damage with our weapon, and also just gives us really more damage output and provides a lot of overall battlefield value for us. Alright friends, that has been my showcase of the Oath of the Phoenix Paladin build. Let me know in the comments below if you would choose different types of equipment or weapons with your style of play, and also what would you multi-class this with? I would love to hear ideas and suggestions from all of you in the comments below. Speaking of builds everyone, a little bit of housekeeping on the side. I do have plans on releasing more builds of the Mystic Psyker class because, well, there's a whole bunch of subclasses with the Mystic class that I included in one of my previous videos too. We will save that for a separate video. I know several of you have been really looking forward to seeing more of those subclasses. But also, to all of the new viewers, if you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for taking the time to watch. And if you love talking shop about all things D&D, Baldur's Gate builds, a little bit of Warhammer Fantasy and Elder Scrolls, I'd love to have you join us on those adventures, friends. So remember to hit the like, subscribe, and bell icon notifications, and I'll save all of you a seat at the table for the next few adventures. Take care and farewell.